Recording in progress. Okay, Bob, all yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bajek. I'm a freelance journalist. Used to be a full-time journalist, did some corporate communications. I guess I was brought on to speak about ethics in journalism and decisions I made more than 10 years ago, covering chemical contamination on the defunct Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois. Um, I just take ethics very seriously. I know Dr. Collins was saying that you guys were studying the SPJ Code of Ethics. Uh, and I think part of reporting, one of the tenets that I followed in that was not to be influenced internally and externally. So internally would be people like my editors who didn't want to do the story, and externally could be town pressures and various governments. It was actually local, state, and federal that were kind of pushing back on me. So just all levels of government. Um, it's been 10 years. It's a long time. I've had some time to reflect on this, and I do believe that a free press is essential to a well-informed public. Obviously, with the pandemic and social media, misinformation sites, disinformation sites, it's important to verify information and get good information for voters and taxpayers. Um, when I was in college with Dr. Collins, I worked for the Daily Easter News newspaper, and on the masthead they had a saying said, "Tell the truth and don't be afraid," and that was something that I believed in. It kind of reminded me of, you probably heard when you were younger, "The truth will set you free," or "The pen is mightier than the sword." I just had a belief and confidence in that, where ideas are very powerful. They're more powerful than threats or suppression of information, more powerful than just moneyed interests. Um, I just always wanted to make a difference with my reporting. When I was a kid, I liked watching the nightly newses. It used to be CBS, NBC, and ABC, and all those anchors, like Brokaw, Rather, and Jennings. I think they just left an impression on me. They just seemed very professional. They wanted to serve the public. Brian Williams was somebody I really liked as well, and he eventually took over for Brokaw. But I remembered him covering, some of the wars or 9/11, and again, it just seemed like he would maybe put himself in danger or just work long hours to serve the public. Um, when I was working on that Chanute story, it started in 2013 in the summer, and that was the same summer when Edward Snowden leaked some information to the public about just um, the wide government surveillance that was happening. That was against the Fourth Amendment, just like a wide warrant. And I think that stuck to me. I was 25 at the time, and uh, I just thought that was a brave thing to do. And if he could do something like that, and he was getting, he left the country, I didn't have to do something like that. I thought, well, I could put myself out there and try to help with this situation. Um, Sorry about that. I guess one of the moments, like Dr. Collins wanted me to talk about a couple moments. There was a meeting in late November 2013 called the Restoration Advisory Board meeting about what they were doing with Chanute Air Force Base. We had activists there. There was a local news channel, and it was a very heated meeting. And before that meeting, it was kind of unusual because they brought in an Air Force public relations specialist from Colorado. So, again, that was just shortly after the Great Recession, and they're spending resources to get somebody from Colorado and she wasn't even part of Chanute information. So they're briefing her on this, and she was like a specialist to like douse fires, and she said that, well, we want to meet with you. And it was like Air Force people and EPA people, but it was going to be like 10 against 1 basically. And they said, you can't have any editors. I wanted my editors there as well. I wanted to take notes, record. They said no. And I said, well, I don't know if I could do a meeting like that, because I don't want this information off the record. This is public information. Um, you might tell me stuff that we should publish, but if I didn't want to get into possible legal issues if I would report on it later, which I might have. anyway, but I figured I had more information that I already had a lot of documents. I had sources. I knew where to look for more information, so I knew I necessarily didn't have that. But even when I was going to try to re-ask about that, the meeting was very weird because a gentleman got like apprehended during the meeting. I've never seen that in a public meeting. Um, he was one of the activists, and I mean, the meeting got stopped, and I talked to journalists in every walk of life. They said, "Have you ever seen this? Have you ever heard of this?" You know, from other journalists. I said, "No, that's very unusual." So I asked her after, and she says, "No, we're going to have to punt, and we're not going to have this meeting." So I did call and email her before. After I got fired, she referred me to other people and just distanced herself from that. But then she still continued doing fire control, maybe about a year after that happened. I guess the second part where I had to make a decision was maybe about a month after that. I was already out off of the newspaper for about 2 weeks, and the vice president of the News Gazette newspapers, she emailed me and said, "Hey, people are telling me you're reporting on this stuff." And again, it's weird because I'm not part of that anymore. And she said, "Well, if you have any, photos, documents, notes, recordings, videos, anything like that, that was from the Rantoul press, you could just destroy it and all that." And I'm like, I'm not going to do that because, I obtained this information. I have them on my own devices and my notes. I did a lot of this work on my free time. And I just had Joe Trento, who was part of the Public Education Center. That was where I was doing the stories for. He just said, he talked to her and just said, "If you try to prosecute this guy, I'm going to get legal counsel on you." So I knew my rights as a journalist, that we have strong protections with the First Amendment and public right to know. There are some limitations, but it's very narrow. And I knew from my classes in Eastern that, I was in the right for that. So it was just something that, I wanted to make a difference. As a young journalist, you guys probably heard of people like Stephen Glass and Jason Blair. They were around my age at the time. They did not make good decisions with ethics where, they're fabricating stories and trying to advance themselves. I wanted to be more like Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who were, again, around my age, and they were, threatened to be fired or physically harmed and discredited, but they still did the story of Watergate, and, they made a big difference in a lot of society and other journalists' lives where they decided to pursue the profession.
Those are really great points, Bob. And yeah, even when you make a decision, as I've said, you make a decision. Oh, I know what I have to do. You make that you can live with. And sometimes I look at, if I make a good decision and I can live with it and I get fired or anything, I call it a blessing from denial. If you're going to fire me from doing something I just believe in, I take that. Good. Doesn't feel good like, oh, I got fired. But knowing your skill and knowing that you can do that is still going to make a difference, because even if you get fired or anything along those lines, they're not taking away your skill. And so that's a good thing. And even when Carl Bernstein came to campus at the U of I and here at Ohio University, when I first met him, with my question was, and if you all have seen it with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman in there in the movie, one of the things that I ask about, that I've always wanted to ask, it's some groundbreaking work in journalism. He said, Bob, and one of the things I think about is Frank Wills. Nobody knows who Frank Wills is. Frank Wills is a security guard that called it in and said, "Hey, somebody's breaking into the offices and stealing secrets and stealing campaign this and campaign that." And if it wasn't for his honesty, there would not have even. And I think about doing stories, I thought to myself, he died because he turned in somebody breaking into the office, the Democratic office. Nobody wanted to hire him. He never got another job in DC, where he lived with his mom. He died poor and with his mom because he was a hero. And I always think to myself, as one of my students asked it one of our guest speakers, because people go on and they have fame. They go on and do great things. I think to myself, did you reach back and help the person that helped you get that fame? So that is another decision where, like the Taste of Gullah, when I did the Taste of Gullah and PBS, you have to take out all the commercial stuff, all the advertising. But these were people whose land had been hiked up, their taxes had been hiked up 400%. Now, these are people who have no municipality. They don't have any police department. They don't have a hospital. They're not paying, there's nothing to pay taxes on. So they said all of a sudden, they needed that land up and down the water to build up golf resorts, time resorts, hotels. And I saw that story and I said, wait a minute, something's not right here. As a reporter, as a journalist, you love history. You love looking at both sides of the story, right? And so I did the investigation and the research. And I found out here are some people that still live off the land. There's someone that didn't even have indoor plumbing. And they have a sign, they get a notice that says, you owe this much in taxes, property taxes. All of a sudden, hiked it up 350 to 400%. These people didn't have the money to pay that. So what happens? They took the land that had been with them the entire time since they came over from West Africa, right? The Gullah Geechee. So what I did was I took out the commercial part and put it on PBS. But then I did the webisodes that at the end of each episode, if you want to go on a tour, if you want to get with the person that does the sweetgrass baskets, you can get in contact with them because I was able to put their information. Still ethical. I just followed the rules because there are rules, right? And everything that you do, even as a journalist, which brings me to my question to you, Bob, is worked within that realm. You've worked with as a journalist where other people, policies that you had to adhere to or get fired. But then you started a podcast where you're your own boss. So did the ethical question involving media and society change for you once you became your own boss, your own writer, your own producer? Did you look at things differently? Do you think of the ethical dilemma, or is it not there as pressured or stressed, or what? News versus sports? I don't know. How do you navigate that?
Well, I think there might be less pressure because I want to do the same principles that I did when I was at the Rantoul Press or when I did corporate internal news where you know, I tell the truth. I have a good story. I try to inform my audience, whoever they are on proper context. I guess with the podcast, I just try to make sure that I produce it well, get good guests, prep them. Try to have thoughtful discussion. I know it used to be strictly basketball. I think we're pivoting to just a water sport thing, but we were trying to talk a little bit about sports and society at the time. Like it was during the pandemic, we were talking about Black Lives Matter and just protesting about safety with COVID, about maybe just kind of economic aspects in sports. So again, we wanted to at least do the lens where we are truthful and informative to our audience. And at any time, let's say if we had a mistake on a fact, we would correct it on the record. So I just think that if you are doing a podcast or anything like that, the same rules and tenets apply where you just want to have that respect to your audience, and I think they'll give you that respect back.
Oh, we turn it down.
Yeah. My name is Miriam Lassisi Mustafa.
Okay,
Sorry.
please.
My name is Miriam Lassisi Mustafa.
How you
Okay,
doing?
sorry, what question I wanted to ask has to do with community journalism. How do you think social media has affected or could have affected your coverage of the Chanute Air Force Base reportage in Rantoul in relation to community journalism practice?
Well, I think at the time, social media was a little more nascent at the time, about 10, 11 years ago. There was some effect, like I did use Facebook at the time. maybe Twitter a little bit to just communicate to some sources and people would share some information, but it was a little harder for things to go viral. We didn't have TikTok or Instagram is not the thing it is at the moment. I did get some traction on those stories at the time for the public education center. Joe Trento, who was the editor who decided to run my stories, he said those were one of the most well-read stories, and they did get shared a lot on email and uh, Facebook at the time. I think there were like 50 or 60,000 shares within a few months, which is significant because at the time, I didn't have a big name as a journalist, and this was like, deep into policy and government, which is not as I guess sexy as a story as Kardashians or Taylor Swift or anything like that. But just for something that deep of reporting, it did at least Facebook at the time helped. Maybe now because some of the chemical issues I've talked about, like PFCs and some other things. I think there's fire foam. Those are big carcinogens. We didn't know that as well at the time, but that's been released. Maybe that would have helped as well. I think some of the aspects too with the Flint water crisis and what happened in Jackson, Mississippi as well, just with poor water quality. There was more focus on environmental issues and how a bad water supply could affect a community. So, my reporting was before that. So I think if I did this type of reporting now, maybe there'd be a little more traction.
Hello,
Hi,
can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, my name's Maeve Kelly, and I was wondering, I saw that you were like heavily discouraged when you were writing that story about the contamination, and you were even fired. So I was wondering, like, why would a news organization not want to capitalize on that story and like your connection with it? And how did getting fired like affect your confidence and your path going forward with that story?
Those are very good questions. I was flabbergasted because, we read about journalists, like the big newspapers or radio TV at the time, um, those journalism movies, like people have high ethical standards and they want to help the public, but maybe we saw, at least I saw some of the bad underbelly of that if local officials and the editors have too cozy of a relationship. I did talk to other journalists after that. They were saying that that could be a challenge with community journalism if you're in a small community. They view the newspaper as a good PR vehicle, and you do try to make the community look good, but I think it gets balanced with truth telling, and they didn't want to do that. So I just thought it was weird. I guess other weird things besides spiking my story numerous times. If anybody ever reads the whole thing, you don't have to. These are really long stories, but I wanted to do a story before that big rap board meeting. We did stories before, and then they're like, "Well, we don't want to do this one." They spiked that one, and I'm like, "Okay, maybe I can do a column just encouraging people and just saying these are some of the issues." I wrote it. They said, "Well, we don't understand it," even though it was clear. So then I simplified it. They didn't run that either. And then after they fired me, at first I had a story about the meeting, like for the next issue. We were a weekly. They didn't run it. They fire me. They run something 3 weeks after, and the whole thing is sanitized. You don't have anything about chemical concerns. You don't have anything about police coming arresting that guy, basically, or initial arrest. I guess it didn't go down on that. I had to get a police report later. They didn't talk about WAND from Decatur, which is a community about 60 miles away, covering that. Just a lot of weird things that they didn't mention, and their headlines were just like, "Oh, the meetings instead of being quarterly are going to be twice a year." So that was one headline and first part of the story, and then the second story was just saying that, "Oh, there's going to be educational opportunities about you know contamination or the history of the base for like high school and middle school kids." And of course, as you see, that misses the mark of what those meetings were. Another thing was when I was trying to follow up on a FOIA request that I did before I left. Somebody from the Illinois EPA said, "Well, we were trying to call your office, you weren't there, and your old boss, Tim Evans, said we're going to close that FOIA request." I've never heard of a newspaper even, you know, closing a request before, even if they disagreed with what the reporter was doing. So again, those were really weird things. I think it's irregular. It did hurt my confidence because that was my first full-time job as a journalist. I did a lot of contract work and freelancing at the time. It was just really hard because, as you know, there's been a lot of industry contraction, and unfortunately it's continued to this day when you hear about, you know, Los Angeles Times and Sports Illustrated and other publications. But a lot of journalists said, you know, you did the right thing. And that was like my goal, because I could have just not done the story or sanitized it, but you know, I think that would have been more like a lie of omission, not pursuing that story. And would I have been a journalist? No, I would have been a stenographer for those in powers. So I do think that the decisions I made were ones that I could sleep at night, because, you know, my parents taught me to be, you know, a good person. And I think partly being a good person is doing your job, at least if it doesn't harm others.
Thank you, Bob. Any more questions as we close out this class period? Any other questions? Larissa, are you coming up here or, oh, okay. One final question, if that's okay, Bob?
Yeah, no, that's
Okay,
totally fine.
great. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Larissa Mancias, and I just have a question in terms of like podcasting and making that like a career. Do you feel as if like any specific platform helped you, or do you have any suggestions on any specific platforms?
Those are good questions. I don't think the platform matters as much. The biggest thing is to just go out and do it. You have to pick a topic that you feel comfortable and knowledgeable about, and then just plan it like as a journalist would plan. You want to say like, oh, how I'm going to structure a show. So, you know, you just build questions, you do your own research. At times you can get guests. You know, I had Dr. Collins as a guest talking about race and gender in sports was part of her topic, which she's an expert in those fields. I don't think it really matters on platform, though. You could promote it to your social media circles. The biggest thing is just getting quality content out there, and hopefully advertisers will come.
Okay. That's really some wonderful information, Bob. I'm proud of you, all your accomplishments. You make me proud as a journalist. Also, as a former student of mine who just paved his own road and doing some great things. What's the name of your podcast that they can be watching and listening to, Bob?
It's the Bajek and Brown podcast. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus because both me and Theus have been working a lot, but we're trying to reboot that show. But we do have a catalog of those shows, and that's on Spotify and Apple. I believe maybe on some other podcast channels.
Okay, great. If you want to send me that link, I'd be more than happy to share it with the rest of the students. So when they can listen to the archives and some of the great stories that you've had, I want to thank you so much. We want to thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you, everyone. And we wish you all the very best. And I will talk to you a little later. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.